It didn't make headlines. There were no cameras, no shouting, no viral videos. But on a warm South Carolina morning, when a new employee challenged the wrong man's authority, the quiet aftermath revealed something deeper. The invisible lines we draw between each other, especially at work. The air was thick and sun-baked as Deshaun Kincaid rolled into the gravel lot just outside Spartanburg, his black Ford Expedition rumbling to a stop beside a row of temporary construction trailers. A fine mist of dust rose around the tires as he shifted into park. The digital clock on the dash read 9 a.m. sharp, but Deshaun wasn't here to clock in. At 45, he didn't punch a time card anymore. After more than 20 years in the industry, starting from ditch digging on a summer crew, he'd risen to become vice president of field operations for Carradine Equity Developments. He didn't do boardrooms. He preferred boots and dirt. Morning, he'd dressed for the field tan utility pants, a navy polo with the Carradine logo stitched in gray, and the same worn-in boots he'd refused to part with for years. In his passenger seat was a yellow legal pad. He grabbed it and stepped out into the heat, barely taking a few steps before someone intercepted him. "Can I help you?" The voice came quick, sharp, and carried the subtle tension of authority. Being flexed, a woman in a bright safety vest stood directly in front of him. Probably late 30s, short blonde bob, glasses, and a clipboard clenched like it held courtroom evidence. Her name tag read Melinda Groves. Her narrowed gaze scanned him like he'd stepped onto her private land. "I'm with corporate," Deshaun said calmly. "Here for a walkthrough." She frowned, squinting against the sun. "We don't usually get unannounced visits from corporate. Do you have some ID?" Deshaun paused, not because he was surprised, but because he wasn't. A few nearby workers, busy with tools and material, started to glance over. Everything momentarily stilled. "I'm Deshaun Kincaid," he said, each word firm but measured. "I manage field operations across the southern region. This site is one of 3 I'm reviewing this month." Melinda didn't step aside. If anything, her grip on that clipboard tightened. "We typically receive notice before anyone from CORPORATE comes down." "I don't send notice," he replied evenly. "That's the point." She shifted, uncertain but still planted in place. "Well, I'm calling Trent just to verify." He gave a short nod. "Go ahead." Deshaun stepped aside, letting her dial. He turned his eyes toward the skeletons of high-end townhomes, rising from the dirt, framing complete. Drywall mid-install, insulation stacked. It was looking good, real progress. But the atmosphere had changed, not because of the work, but because of her. Moments later, a door swung open, and Trent Savino, the site manager, came out. Sleeves rolled, tie loosened. His whole expression changed when he spotted Deshaun. "Didn't know you were coming today." Trent grinned, offering his hand. Deshaun took it with one brow raised. "You hiring ex-support security now?" Trent let out a short laugh, clearly trying to diffuse things. "Melinda, this is Mr. Kincaid. He runs field operations across the entire region. We owe most of our paychecks to him." Melinda blinked, visibly rattled now. No one told me you were coming." "You're new," Trent cut in. "Mr. Kincaid likes to drop in without warning. Keeps us sharp, right?" Deshaun didn't respond immediately. "I'll go take a look around. You want someone to walk with you?" "I'm good," he said. Melinda finally stepped aside, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Deshaun gave a nod and moved forward. But just as he passed, he caught a brief glance from a young tech across the lot. The kid had seen everything and quickly looked away. Deshaun walked slowly, not from pain or age, but from experience. He'd been through this before. There had been no racial slurs, no open insults, just that tone, that clipboard, that assumption. It always came wrapped in professional protocol, but the message was the same. "You don't belong here." Se stepped onto the cool slab of freshly poured concrete that would soon be the model unit's lobby. He tried to let it go. Tools were still neatly placed from the morning crew, daylight streaking in through the open framework. Then he heard footsteps again. "Mr. Kincaid." He turned. Melinda had followed him, clipboard still in hand, but her voice was different now, softer, careful. "I didn't mean to come off. I just didn't know who you were," she said. Eyes trained somewhere near his shoulder. Deshaun studied her, reading what wasn't said. "I make surprise visits," he replied. "It's the only way I get the truth on a job site." She nodded nervously. "It's just we've had people sneak in before. Vendors, fake inspectors. For safety, you know." He tilted his head. "So you thought I was faking?" "I didn't recognize you, that's all." She shifted her weight, uncomfortable in her own stance. "How long you been with us?" 3.5 weeks, she said. "I transferred from Augusta. I worked admin for a hospital expansion." He gave a single nod. "All right," she lingered. "You understand, right?" "I didn't mean anything." He paused, then looked back at her. "Ever stop Trent from walking in?" Her mouth opened, closed again. "Well, no, but I recognized him." Deshaun didn't need to say more. He turned and walked away. She stayed behind, still clutching her clipboard like it might explain things for her. Inside the unit, he looked around with clearer eyes. The design was good, the layout smart. Couples would love it. Early morning light from the east side windows, an open flow from kitchen to deck. He made a few notes on the timeline pinned near the framing. Still, the exchange weighed on him. Not her words exactly, but the certainty behind them. The unspoken judgment. It always wore a polite face, but it spoke the same language. You're not supposed to be here, not dressed like that, not in charge. And if he ever pushed back too hard, then he'd be labeled as difficult, angry, loud. So he'd learn to keep it level. Speak only what mattered. Let the rest pass. Still, today's moment stuck in his chest. As he stepped outside again, he spotted Trent near the trailers, phone to his ear. Trent motioned at him. Give me a sec. Deshaun shrugged and took his time. Along the site's edge, 2 laborers were cutting insulation. One older man, gray streaks in his beard, gave him a chin nod. You, the regional guy? He asked. That's right. The man jerked his thumb toward the trailer. This team works hard. Real hard. Just so you know. Deshaun glanced toward the trailer, where Melinda had disappeared. Y'all need anything out here? He asked. Better radios? The man replied. Cheap ones cut out deep in the units. Deshaun gave a slow nod. We'll get that fixed. You can't call out for help if the radio's dead, the man had said. Deshaun jotted that down without missing a beat. Noted. I'll see what we can do. The laborer gave a brief nod and turned back toward the high-pitched whine of the panel saw, which started again like nothing had happened. But Deshaun kept walking, slower now, more reflective. What Melinda had said, or more precisely, how she had said it, still clung to the site like heat-warped dust in a still breeze. Not just in his mind, it had settled everywhere, in every glance, every subtle silence. Back in the trailer, Trent Savino paced near the schedule board, not out of nerves, but with the jittery energy of someone trying to outthink what had already gone wrong. A mug of black coffee, half full and sweating on the edge of the table, sat untouched. Behind him, the whiteboard was filled with job site timelines, deadlines, checklists, order in the middle of chaos. He was just ending a phone call as Deshaun entered. I told her, Trent said immediately, his voice low. I told her who you are. She's embarrassed. Deshaun didn't sit. He took a slow look around the stale scent of fast food, wrappers, dry erase markers, the faint hum of the wall-mounted AC, all of it felt familiar. He let the silence settle longer than was comfortable. Did you ever tell her not to stop people at the gate? He asked. Even-voiced Trent blinked. No, I didn't tell her not to. She's trying to be thorough. Ever been asked for ID on one of your own sites? Trent gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Not once. Deshaun gave him a steady look. Exactly. I get it, Trent added quickly. It's a bad look. But I really think she just didn't know. That's what always bothers me, Deshaun said quietly. They never know, and yet it keeps happening. Trent shifted his weight, hands buried deep in his pockets. So what do you want to do? I'm not here to humiliate her, Deshaun said, but we've got to stop pretending like these things are random. She didn't stop me because I looked suspicious. She stopped me because I didn't look like the guy in charge. Trent didn't reply at first. Then, almost cautiously, he said, I could talk to her again. No, Deshaun shook his head. Let her sit with it, let it echo. Trent turned back toward the scheduled board, tracing his finger across deadlines that hadn't changed since last week. She's sharp, though. Took over document control like she's been here half a year. I'm sure she's excellent at her tasks, Deshaun replied. Doesn't mean she's good at seeing people. Trent opened his mouth but said nothing. Probably the smartest thing he'd done that morning. Deshawn finally sat, flipping open the site safety binder on the table. Your injury reports are up to date, he noted. That's solid. Yeah, HVAC team caught a twisted ankle last week. No time lost. Deshaun made a note, more interested in the pattern of care than the numbers. He wasn't there to babysit. He was there to read the culture, how the team worked, how they looked out for one another. I spoke to the insulation crew, he added. They need better radios. They're cutting out in the back units. I'll get it done today. Trent nodded quickly. Deshaun leaned back just a little, eyes narrowing. Remember that warehouse fire in Durham last year? How could I forget? Lost the whole third wing. Same issue, Deshaun said. Spotty radios and a half-built structure. Nobody thought it was urgent until it was. Trent exhaled, deeply, like the memory still hurts. Understood. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the AC the only noise. Then the trailer door creaked open. Melinda stepped in, faltering slightly when she saw Deshaun seated across from Trent. Oh, I didn't know, she mumbled. Trent offered a practiced smile. Come on in. You two have already met. Yes, she said softly, eyes not quite meeting Deshaun's. She walked in, clipboard in hand, the same one she'd held like a shield that morning. Her voice was more grounded now. I've updated the submittal logs, highlighted all pending. RFs? Do you need me to walk through them? Trent glanced at Deshaun, silently passing the ball. Her posture was different now, no longer blocking access, no longer defending a boundary. Just doing her job. That's fine, Deshaun said. I'll review the notes later. Melinda gave a brief nod and turned to leave. But just as she reached for the door, he spoke. Melinda, she paused. Next time you're not sure who someone is, he said, voice low, deliberate. Ask their name. Don't ask for proof, they belong. She turned around, her face flushed. Slyly, but she held his gaze this time. Understood. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Deshawn sat still for a few seconds longer. Something had shifted, a crack in the surface. Small, but real. The kind that either heals or deepens. By now, the sun had climbed high. Heat poured down over the site. Deshawn walked out toward Unit 14A, the skeleton of its frame casting shadows. Over his collar, he studied the ductwork, the spacing, the structural flow, every detail mapped in his mind like a blueprint, but his attention was split. Part of him still inside that trailer. This wasn't just about specs and deadlines. It never had been. He wasn't just inspecting beams and brackets, he was watching people, noticing how they moved when they thought no one from the top was watching. He passed a plumber working low to the ground, welding copper with a torch. The man looked up, nodded briefly, then got back to work without saying a word. That had been the pattern all morning. A glance, a pause, then back to routine. Like everyone had silently agreed to pretend that nothing had happened. But Deshawn knew better. It had happened, and ignoring it wouldn't erase it. He thought back to a site in Austin, years ago. Different company, same story. A foreman once refused to unlock a storage trailer for him, even after seeing his ID. Claimed he needed a supervisor's sign-off. Deshawn had laughed back then, confused more than amused. But the memory clung, sticky and sharp. Since that day, he'd vowed one thing: never let anyone's doubt define you. Still, this wasn't just annoying anymore, it was draining. The weight of constantly having to prove yourself in spaces you'd already earned. He knelt beside a vent line, checking bracket spacing. The work was solid. Someone had taken pride in it. You know HVAC? The voice caught him off guard. A younger guy stood nearby, coiled Romex over one shoulder, brown skin and a backwards cap. His name badge read Ruben Mathis. Used to, Deshawn said as he stood. I rotate crews. Was at Greensboro last month, Ruben added. Didn't expect corporate to show today. Deshawn smiled faintly. That's kind of the point, Ruben smirked. Yeah, figured that lady up front had no clue who you were. Deshawn raised an eyebrow. You saw that. Everyone did. Ruben shrugged. You were calm though, real calm. Deshawn looked at him for a beat. How would you have handled it? Ruben scratched his neck. Honestly, probably not like that. Deshawn nodded. That's why I'm where I am. And why you could be too, if you learn when to speak. And when to let silence carry weight. Ruben absorbed that, quietly. You think she'll get fired? No, Deshawn replied. She'll get time to reflect. That's more useful than a pink slip. Still feels wrong. I know, he said simply. They stood quietly for a moment. Then Ruben pointed toward the ceiling. You see how they shifted the return vent back 6 inches? Deshawn craned his neck. That's going to mess with the wiring path. Already did, Ruben said. We flagged it for site approval. Push it again before Friday, Deshawn said. Can't let small errors build big problems. Ruben slid his phone back into his pocket. If they don't fix that now, it's gonna screw final inspection. Deshawn gave him a light pat on the shoulder. You're sharp. Keep pushing. By the time the sun had started to drop, Deshawn had made his rounds. Every unit walked. Supply logs double-checked. Conversations with subs handled with quiet efficiency. 2 delay risks flagged. 1 in framing, 1 in finishing. He was on his way to the truck when Trent caught up to him, his shirt damp and clinging. You good? Trent asked, breath short. I've seen enough. You still planning to send this up the chain? Deshawn glanced over. I always send my site notes up. You know that? Yeah, Trent said, hesitating. But I mean, the thing this morning. I'm not filing a complaint, Deshawn replied, but I am documenting it. That's different. Trent looked uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck. She's not a bad person. I didn't say she was. They stood in the heat-stained silence of the gravel lot. Sun sinking, shadows getting longer. It's just that complicated, Trent said. No, it's not, Deshawn answered, calm and steady. It only feels complicated when people refuse to call things what they are. Trent didn't respond, just lowered his eyes. When Deshawn got into the truck and closed the door, he knew this wasn't over. It never really was. Some things followed you quiet, insistent, as if waiting for you to stop long enough to feel their weight. 2 days later, Deshawn sat alone in the 5th floor conference room at headquarters in Marietta, a manila folder labeled Incident 7/12. Spartanburg sat beside the formal site report. He wasn't here to stir drama. He was here to add one more mark on a pattern too many chose not to see. Maureen Klein stepped in, sharp eyes, and one of the few who actually listened. I read your notes, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Walk me through it. She stopped me before I made it to the trailer, Deshawn said evenly. Asked for ID, said I didn't look authorized. Wouldn't let me speak. Then she called Trent. Maureen scribbled without interrupting. She stepped aside once he showed up, but the damage was already done. She didn't see someone in charge, just someone that didn't belong. Maureen nodded slowly. And you're not pushing for discipline? No. I want training. Not the checkbox kind. The kind that makes people actually stop and question why their instincts point the way they do. That's not easy training. It's not supposed to be. He reached into his folder and slid another report across the table. This one's from Savannah. Same thing, different name. Maureen scanned it, frown deepening. You think she meant harm? Deshaun didn't answer right away. I think harm doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it just comes from never being asked. To look closer. I'll speak with her. We'll build this into the new bias recognition modules. No opt-outs, he said firmly. Understood. A knock at the door broke the moment. Trent peeked in. You mind? Deshaun gave a small shrug. Trent entered, looking smaller than usual. I just wanted to say sorry. That's not who we are. Deshaun watched him, waited. She's rattled, Trent added. Knows she messed up? This isn't about her, Deshaun said. It's about what happens. The next time, people run these sites who don't even know who signs their checks. That's a leadership failure. You hired her. You trained her. If she faltered, you missed something in the handoff. Maureen interjected softly. This is a culture opportunity. Trent, not a cleanup. Trent nodded, quiet, humbled. As Deshaun stood, he gathered his notes. I don't want this buried in a memo no one reads. I want every new hire to know leadership isn't a suit. It's how you show up. It's how you see people. Maureen smiled faintly. We'll write it in. Make sure they read it. That evening, in Simpsonville, Melinda Groves sat alone on her apartment balcony. The sun was fading beyond the rooftops. Her coffee had gone warm. Her phone screen stayed dark. She hadn't told anyone. Not her sister. Not her old project manager. Not even her boyfriend. It wasn't a small thing. Not to her. She kept replaying the moment the way he stepped out of the truck, clipboard in hand. Her voice, sharp with protocol. Her posture, defensive. It wasn't personal. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. But quietly, undeniably, she knew if it had been Trent stepping out of that truck, she wouldn't have asked for proof. And that truth hit harder than anything HR could say. She didn't think of herself as biased. She'd donated, supported, said all the right things. But in that moment, her instincts spoke louder than her values, and now she couldn't stop hearing them. Melinda sat at the kitchen counter, her phone in hand, staring at the group chat with her old coworkers from Augusta. Her thumbs hovered over the screen before typing. Ever realize you're not as unbiased as you thought? She stared at it, too vague, too pointed, too honest. She deleted it. The words weren't ready yet, not for them, and maybe not even for her. She set the phone aside and walked into the living room, where the soft evening light draped the furniture in quiet tones. A neat stack of orientation binders sat untouched on the coffee table. Knowles, brochures, packets, all handed to her by Trent on day one. Like most people, she'd skimmed them at best. But now, she pulled one into her lap, flipping through pages until a heading caught her eye. Corporate representation and on-site authority. Page 3, just one small paragraph. But the line hit hard now. Employees may be visited by senior leadership without notice. Professionalism is expected regardless of recognition. She might have read that once in passing, but it never landed until tonight. And suddenly, a memory stirred. Second day on the job, walking through the site with her clipboard, when an older Tyler cracked a joke. Didn't expect the boss to be in ballet flats. She'd laughed it off back then, maybe even felt flattered. But now, she saw it differently. It wasn't that far from how she'd treated Deshaun. She hadn't expected him to be in charge, and she hadn't laughed. She'd blocked his way like she was guarding a vault. Melinda leaned back on the couch, eyes closed, letting out a breath she'd been holding since morning. Maybe this wasn't about job security. Maybe it was about pausing long enough to question why she reacted the way she did before her assumptions did the damage. And if she couldn't answer that honestly, maybe she had no business standing at any gate. She made herself a quiet vow. Before the week was out, she'd find him, not to defend, not to explain, just to own it. Even if it wouldn't fix everything, the words had to come before the silence hardened into something worse. 2 days later, in a conference room with dull carpet and humming vents, Deshaun sat across from Trent at the Greenville satellite office, just 20 minutes from Spartanburg. The room was small, forgettable. Deshaun liked that. Less show, more real. Trent placed a foam cups of coffee on the table, both steaming. Didn't want to do this over email, Trent said, settling into his seat. Felt like we needed to actually talk. Deshaun accepted the cup but didn't drink. His eyes were clear but heavy, the kind of weight that comes from having the same conversation in a dozen different rooms, always circling the same point, with people who meant well but still didn't get it. All right, Deshaun said. Then let's talk. Trent nodded, fidgeting. Been thinking about what you said about training, assumptions. Truth is, I didn't prep her for who you were, I figured. If people just do their jobs, that should be enough. Deshaun leaned in, voice steady. That's the problem. You think you're managing workflow, but you're managing people. People bring more than tools and work boots. They bring blind spots, bias, filters they don't even know they're using. Trent nodded, sipping the too hot coffee. I'll be honest, when she told me someone refused to show ID, I rolled my eyes. But I didn't expect it to be you. Deshaun didn't blink. Exactly. You didn't expect someone like me to be in charge. Best not, Trent began. It is, Deshaun cut in, quiet but firm. And I don't need you to feel guilty about it. I need you to stop being surprised. This isn't about catching anyone out. It's about owning the pattern. If you're in charge, it's your job to ask why some faces trigger protocol and others don't. Trent swallowed. I'm trying. I don't need you to try, Deshawn said. I need you to take responsibility. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Remember that intern, Kara from Auburn? Dish asked. Trent nodded. She said the same thing Melinda didn't recognize who I was. Difference is, Kara caught herself. She asked questions. She listened. Melinda didn't, she assumed, then hid behind the rules. Trent looked down. She was probably nervous. Trying to prove herself. Everyone's nervous. Deshawn replied. But respect isn't something you hand out once someone proves. They deserve it. It should be standard. Trent exhaled slowly. That one landed. I don't want her punished, Deshawn continued. I want her coached. I want the next guy who looks like me to walk on a job site and not be treated like an error in the system. I'll make that happen, Trent said. You'd better. And I want more than words. I want monthly culture reports, not just safety and numbers. I want updates on how people are seeing each other, where tensions are brewing, and that language. I want it in your training sessions. Trent nodded. Done. And don't you dare make it a slideshow, Deshawn added. If they can frame a house, they can have a 30-minute conversation about decency. Trent smirked faintly. You want me to lead it? No, Deshawn said. I want you to own it. But he knew a meeting wouldn't change the culture overnight. Real change came when people stayed in the discomfort long enough to learn something new. 3 weeks later, Deshawn pulled into a site outside Lexington, South Carolina, phase 3 of a residential build. Humid air pressed in from every side, and before he even reached the scaffolding, sweat clung to his back. He didn't announce himself, he never did. That was the whole point. The place looked sharp, clean lines, labeled routes, crew leads coordinating by the utility trench. He walked with steady steps, clipboard under his arm, hat pulled low. Gravel shifted beneath his boots as he moved through. Before long, a voice called out, calm but firm. Hey Ken, I help you, sir. It wasn't suspicious, wasn't meek either. A younger man, maybe mid-20s, walked toward him, red safety vest, laminated badge, Trey Odom, safety coordinator. Deshawn paused. Morning, just checking progress. Trey hesitated, scanning his face. Are you with a subcontractor or? A low voice pierced through the ambient hum of the construction site. He's from corporate. The words came from behind a materials crate, not loud, but clear enough to stop both men in their tracks. Deshawn and Trey turned, stepping into the open was Kendall Bryson, assistant foreman, her tan carradine t-shirt marked with sawdust, a carpenter's pencil tucked behind her ear. She'd only been with the company 6 months, but her presence in that moment was firm and grounded. I saw him out at the Spartanburg site earlier this month, she added, brushing her hand down her arm. This is Mr. Kincaid. He runs field ops. Trey's face drained of color as realization dawned. Oh damn, I didn't know, sir. Deshawn lifted a hand, interrupting gently. You're doing your job. His tone was even, not scolding. That's what I like to see. Tension drained from the air like someone had flipped a valve. Trey exhaled visibly, his shoulders sagging with relief, and Kendall gave Deshawn a subtle nod, almost a grin. You want someone to walk you through today's punch list? She asked, casually professional. I'll take a look solo first, Deshawn replied, but I'll need time with your team leads this afternoon. You got it? As he moved deeper into the job site, something shifted in him. It wasn't about being recognized. Not anymore. This was the real test, how people responded when they didn't know who he was. Trey hadn't assumed or postured, had asked questions. And Kendall. She hadn't waited until she felt safe or the moment had passed. She had spoken up, right when it mattered. That was rare. That was leadership. Inside Unit 7C, the drywall was freshly installed, electrical wiring tagged and signed off, baseboards half nailed in. Everything was in motion. But Deshawn's mind wasn't on the construction. It kept drifting back to Kendall's words, and what she might have seen before today. Had she been there in Spartanburg? Had the story traveled that far? Word always traveled. Later that day, inside the project trailer, Deshawn sat with a site manager and 2 team leads. Kendall was one of them. They discussed delayed vendor shipments, a slight timeline shift due to weather, some minor budget nothing alarming. But Deshawn could tell this crew ran tight. No one read from notes, no one performed. They weren't trying to impress, they were trying to improve. As the meeting wrapped up, Deshawn closed his folder, but stayed seated, looked over the top of his glasses, casual but intentional. Trey handled himself well this morning, he said. Kendall leaned back slightly, her arms folded. He's sharp, young, but he listens. Didn't overstep, didn't shrink back either. That's not just training, Deshawn said. That's environment. Site manager Omar Flanagan nodded slowly. We've been doing the monthly sessions like you asked. Started the culture reports too. We don't just talk safety now, we talk respect. That was your push, Kendall added. Deshawn nodded, slowly. It's working. He didn't need applause. He didn't even need credit. What he wanted was exactly this. Proof that people were paying attention. Adapting. evolving. As he stepped out toward his truck, Kendall jogged slightly to catch up. "Sir?" she said, almost breathless. He paused. "Yeah, I remember what happened in Spartanburg," she said, her voice lower now, more careful. "Word spread. People talked. You didn't put anyone on blast. You just handled it." .com/Deshaun tilted his head, waiting, and it made people think. Me included. Some of us started looking around, asking ourselves if we would have done the same thing Melinda did. It wasn't gossip. It was a gut check. He exhaled through his nose. "Good. We still got work to do." "We always do," he replied. She gave him a small smile and turned back toward the site. But Deshaun lingered by his truck, watching the rhythm of the crew. Something had changed, but not because he forced it. Because someone else chose to step in. That was how culture actually moved. The following week, Deshaun returned to the Carradine headquarters in Marietta for quarterly review meetings. The building pulsed with the same organized chaos he'd grown used to, floor plans flying off printers, interns, weaving through cubicles, voices clashing over budgets and project updates. It was busy, but it was productive. That afternoon, as he stepped out of a planning session, his assistant handed him a small, folded note. Not an email, not a printed memo. A note. "Would you be willing to speak with me privately?" McDushan stared at the initials. He didn't need a decoder ring to figure out who MG was. Melinda Groves? He flipped the note once, tucked it into his folder, and didn't say a word. He waited until his final meeting of the day ended before dialing the extension scribbled at the bottom. She answered on the second ring. "Melinda Groves." "It's Deshaun," he said. A pause. Then her voice softened. "You got my note?" "I did, if you're open. I won't take long. I'll be in conference room to be in 15. "Don't rush," he said. 15 minutes later, the door clicked shut behind her. She wasn't holding her clipboard this time. No tablet, no printouts, just a slim notebook in one hand and uncertainty in her posture. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, sitting across from him. He didn't respond. "Not yet. I've been thinking about that day," she began. "Every day, actually. About what I said. About how I said it." Deshaun remained silent, letting her carry it. "I thought I was doing my job," she continued. "Checking ID, following protocol. But I've replayed it in my head so many times, and truth is, I wasn't just checking credentials. I was checking whether you fit. And that didn't come from the rulebook. That came from me." Her voice caught slightly. She blinked fast. "I didn't yell. I didn't insult you. But I didn't ask your name either. I didn't ask what you were doing there. I just assumed. And that assumption wasn't neutral." She took a breath. "I'm not here to justify anything. I was wrong. Completely, and I'm sorry." Deshaun leaned forward slightly. "I appreciate that." Melinda nodded, eyes dropping. "I've taken the training Maureen assigned twice, but that's not what changed me. What changed me was how people looked at me afterward, like they were trying to figure out who I really was." She glanced up, and I didn't like that feeling. "But then I thought that might be what you walk into every room feeling, every time." He didn't speak. She kept going. "I'm not ignoring it, Deshaun. I'm not pretending it didn't happen." "Good," he said finally. "Because pretending it didn't happen is how it keeps happening. I've been reading more, listening more, not just in the trainings in real life. I've started asking myself harder questions." Deshaun nodded once. "That's the work. People don't grow from being called out. They grow from being willing to call themselves out." "Looks like you've started." "I have. I still am." He tapped the edge of his notebook. "I didn't file a formal complaint, Melinda, but I documented what happened. Because the next person in my shoes might not be calm, might not have a title that makes people listen." She nodded silently. "You were hired to manage process," he said. "But if you want to stay in this field, learn to manage people. That starts with learning how to see them before you judge them." "I want to," she said. For real. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was honest, heavy, sacred. "All right," he said finally. "Let's call this your reset." Melinda's fingers hovered over the door handle, her breath uneven. A tremor ran down her arm, subtle but present. She blinked once, then again, steadying herself. "Thank you," she murmured, quiet, but not unsure. She stood there for a moment longer, her clipboard left untouched on the side table, hands unclenched, yet trembling, heart loud in her chest. Her eyes flicked toward Deshaun one final time. "I know. Words don't erase what happened," she said, voice thin but determined, "but I hope this is a step." Deshaun gave her a long, steady look. "It is." There were no applause lines. No tears, no grand camera angles. Just the door clicking behind her as she walked out, not as the woman who once wielded authority, like a blade, but as someone trying to piece together what she had helped break. The room felt lighter after she left, not because the burden had vanished, but because someone finally acknowledged it. That apology brief, human, unfinished, stuck with Deshaun longer than he expected. Not because it stung, but because it made sense. It wasn't just for him. It wasn't some HR strategy. It was a beginning, small, maybe fragile, but real. 1 month later, the Carolina sun beat down over a sea of half-built homes, the framework of new lives rising from the red, soiled Deshaun stood near the edge of the Anderson development site, his steel-toed boots planted on gravel and clay. A row of duplexes stretched before him, their skeletal frames humming with activity. Hammer strikes echoed. A circular saw wind. Ladders clattered against aluminum siding. It was hot. Sweat pooled beneath his collar, but he didn't mind. No one stopped him at the gate this time. There was no awkward shuffle from the security booth, no second-guessing stares. Just a nod from the new guard, a man half his age, clipboard in hand, who gave a small wave of acknowledgement and returned to his checklist, like Deshaun belonged there because he did. Inside the site trailer, where the air was stale with coffee and blueprint ink, a laminated poster caught his eye. It was pinned beside the whiteboard where meeting times and concrete deliveries were scrawled in red marker. It read, "Everyone deserves respect before you know their title." Deshaun didn't need to ask who put it there. He already knew. It was from the new onboarding module, a quiet push from Maureen, who'd insisted it be more than policy. Trent had backed her. They didn't just sign off, they led by example. No balloons, no press release. Just a single, stubborn shift in tone. He didn't smile, but something in his chest let go. Deshaun stepped into one of the active units, a soon-to-be family home. Inside, Kendall Bryce, now wearing the title of assistant project manager like it was stitched into her skin, walked the tile crew through final adjustments. She was precise, hands moving through air like a conductor. She caught Deshaun's gaze briefly, gave a small wave of acknowledgement, then went right back to business. She didn't pause, didn't perform, didn't break rhythm just because he was watching. That told him more than any email ever could. The culture hadn't changed overnight, but it had started shifting under its own weight. At Carradine, something subtle but powerful was happening. There was no viral moment, no headline-grabbing drama, but beneath the buzz of drills and the shuffle of boots, the conversation had evolved from hushed compliance to intentional accountability. Weekly toolbox. Talks now included a section called Site Situations. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Crew members were invited to speak about miscommunications, uncomfortable interactions, moments they felt small but didn't know how to name. At first, the response was typical. Too corporate, too soft. Just let us do the work. But then something cracked. A vendor disregarded a female lead's directions. A new carpenter felt like his ideas were being stepped on. A field engineer, built like a linebacker but quiet as a shadow, stood up and told the room about his first mentor. The man had looked him in the eye and said, "You'll never lead in this business unless you look the part." The room went still. Deshaun had been sitting in the back corner that day, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't swoop in with a solution. He just let the silence fill the space, let everyone else sit with the discomfort. Finally, someone murmured, "That's exactly the problem. No memo could have delivered that impact. No HR bulletin could replicate the weight of that moment." Back at HQ, Melinda wasn't leading those meetings. She wasn't standing on a podium or demanding applause, but she was there. When new hires arrived, she didn't just hand them procedure binders or talk procurement metrics. She asked questions, the kind that made people hesitate before answering, because they weren't used to being asked. She listened, really listened. One afternoon, she emailed Deshaun a spreadsheet she'd built herself, something no one had asked her to do. It tracked not just supply chain numbers, but live field concerns brought up during visits. She'd color-coded it, cross-referenced it with HR footnotes. It was the kind of deep dive report that took weeks to get right. She didn't ask for feedback. She didn't present it with fanfare. She just sent it. Deshaun read it quietly. He didn't smile because it was perfect. He smiled because it was intentional, because it was rooted in awareness. And that, in this business, was rarer than talent. A few weeks later, during a quarterly executive roundtable, someone from Phoenix leaned in during a break. He wore the same Sutan steel smile Deshaun had seen 100 times. "I've heard there's something quietly effective happening out there in the Carolinas," the man said. "What kind of bias training did y'all roll out?" Deshaun didn't answer right away. He took a breath. "We didn't roll out a program," he said, slowly. "We created space. Then we stayed in it even when it got uncomfortable." The room hushed. Someone else asked, "Yeah, but does it work?" Deshaun leaned back in his chair. "It's not about whether it works," he said. "It's about whether you care enough to do it, Tevin, if it's slow." No one responded. They just sat there, absorbing the weight of it. Now, standing again at the Anderson site, watching the rhythm of a team moving in harmony, Deshaun felt that slowness again. Not inertia, not delay, but the kind of slow that comes with foundation work, the kind that lasts. He glanced at Kendall, barking instructions over the roar of a power saw. Her tone was sharp, confident, unapologetic, and no one second-guessed her. He saw Trey from Spartanburg, coaching a younger worker on how to secure his safety harness. The kid listened, took notes. No awkward glances, no side-eye. Deshaun walked the length of the site. No one asked who he was. No one looked twice. Not because everyone recognized him, but because no one assumed they shouldn't. And in this world, in this industry, that shift was monumental. He reached his truck, opened the door, and dropped a thick folder on the passenger seat. His shirt clung to his back. The sun was merciless, But for the first time in a long time, he felt clear. He paused for a moment before turning the key. Then, almost under his breath, he said it. Respect shouldn't require recognition. And just like that, he drove. Deshawn's story wasn't rare. It wasn't explosive. There were no screaming matches, no lawsuits, no public takedowns. And that's why it mattered. Because the things that wear people down aren't always dramatic. Sometimes, it's the small assumptions, the quiet dismissals, the invisible weight of being seen after you prove yourself not before. True leaders don't just rise above it, they face it, with intention, with stillness, not for applause, but so the next person doesn't have to fight the same silent war. If this story made you pause even for a second, don't let it fade. Share it, talk about it. Ask yourself, where do those moments live in your world? Because respect should never follow recognition, it should lead.